okay? When you talk about poetry, the elements that you discuss are different from those of prose or fiction. And so poetry has certain parts or elements that need to be addressed. Again, when you write about poetry, you need to be explicit. You need to use these elements exactly, meaning you mention these words that are on your screen right now. So together they form another acronym, and it's FRAME. Think of a poem as a picture. In fact, it can be many pictures, almost like a collage. But imagery is so critical for a poem. Imagery is sensory language, using your five senses, things that create pictures in your mind. And they are very tangible, very specific. Images can lead to deeper thoughts, but they are just what they say they are. So if there's a smell of baking bread, then that's an image of baking bread. You know, the smell of it is an image. So the images of poetry make a picture, and you need a frame. And the frame is what we have here. F stands for form. Before you even read a poem, you can tell some things about the form. You start with the title. Does it have a title? Is the title the first line of the poem? You can also see if the poem is broken up into chunks. We call them stanzas, not paragraphs. And each line is called a line, not a sentence, right? You can have a sentence in a poem. You don't have to, but you can. And that sentence can carry over from one line to the next. That's something to be thinking about when you talk about form. Are sentences broken up? Are there capital letters at the beginning of every line, which is a convention of traditional poetry? Do you have a traditional poem with set lengths of lines, and it's clear there's a set way of doing things, and even words at the ends that you can tell rhyme? You don't want to get into the next one too soon, but that can be a part of form, the shape of the poem. R is rhyme, rhythm, and also repetition, because repetition is not rhyme, but it does create rhythm, and it's a part of many poems. Edgar Allan Poe used a lot of repetition. Bells, 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 nevermore, nevermore, right? And so rhyme is sometimes exact, where you have words that sound very similar, they end the same way. And sometimes you have what we call slant rhymes, or sight rhymes, which are not exact, okay? And so rhythm is also called meter. And in traditional poetry, you had beats that you could feel within each line. Think of the hymns you might sing in church. You have a set rhythm for those lines of a hymn. And that, you know, when you look at traditional poetry, a lot of times you can actually imagine the melody that would go with it because of the way it's created. Emily Dickinson, you know, her family was very religious, and so she wrote a lot of hymn-like poems that are not quite hymns. A stands for about, and this is obviously the heart. It's the middle thing. It's what you need to do. You always need to put it in your own words, the poem. You need to say what the poem is about. So you paraphrase. That means pretty much line by line, but you'll also summarize, which means compress and condense it all. M stands for metaphor, but it also stands for any figurative language, which means you have a word that represents, it's a comparison. So I might say, he is a rock of a man. She is a rock of a woman, right? It means her strength is obvious, and we use rock to describe that person. And so that is metaphor, but you can also have simile, where you use the word like or as, or you could have personification. You could make something that's not alive come alive through people-like language. And finally, the last thing you do when you analyze a poem, and this can kind of be done in order, just like scapegoat can kind of be done in order, S-C-A-P-E-G-O-A-T. F-R-A-M-E can be done in order, and E, engage, means go deeper. Okay, you know what the form is, you know the rhyme and rhythm, you know what it's about, you see the figurative language, but now what's the point here? Why are all these images being used, and how do they fit together? And it's a unifying element, but it's also a personal element. You go deeper with the poem. I hope this helps just to review these elements.